All right, we are we? No, we're not on yet.
Okay. Maybe the internet don't like my 1 o'clock time.
The internet just gonna have to get used to this. We on. Yep, we're live.
Good afternoon, everybody. We are so excited. We are so excited. We are so excited for you to join us for another wonderful, inspiring, educational, empowering, and empathic Bible study today on this Tuesday. We thank you for joining us on today. We're going to ask that you please grab pen and paper because you don't want to miss this lesson for today. You know, I say this every Tuesday, but this Tuesday, for real, I mean it. This is my favorite lesson. I'm telling you, this is my favorite lesson. I know you're going to say, but Danielle, you say this every Tuesday, and I know I do, but this time again, I really mean it. You know that we have been talking about an amazing book. We've been talking about an amazing book by Pastors Gabby Joe Wilkes and Andrew Wilkes, a husband and wife co-clergy ministry team that has penned this amazing book called Psalms for Black Lives, Reflections for the Work of Liberation. I'm telling you, if you haven't had opportunity to grab this book, please, what are you waiting for? You have to grab this jewel. You know, sometimes we look for all different types of motivations and inspirations through various types of books. But do you know, according to our authors, that the Psalms in our Christian biblical text provide phenomenal encouragement? And so this amazing jewel by the Wilkes family has inspired us and encourages us to rethink the Psalms, particularly as it relates to social justice. And so during our time together, we have been taking a look at the various Psalms that exist and how we can read these particular Psalms through the lens of Black liberation. I'm so glad that you joined us for today, because the amazing Psalm we want to look at on today is Psalm 8. Psalm 8. In our book, for those who have the book, it's featured in day 8 of our book, day 8. The title of our lesson for today is You're in Charge. You're in charge. When I was growing up, there was an amazing TV series that I used to love to watch. Now, I'm sorry, I might date myself. When I say this, but this amazing show that I used to love to watch was Charles in Charge. That's right, Charles in Charge. Charles was a guy who had a family, and his family would always seem to find themselves in particular crisis and various types of chaos and calamity. But Charles would always try to tell his family, no matter what, you have to always remember, I'm in charge. I got it. I can fix it. I can handle it, whatever is the issue or problem that we face as a family. And somehow or another, the irony is Charles was never in charge. The irony in the show was, for some reason, Charles thought he was in charge, only to discover he wasn't in charge. Other people in his family, friends, and community would step up, and those would be the persons that were in charge. For real. Those would be the persons that would fix the situation. But Charles liked to take the credit and used to always say to his family, nope, it worked out because of me. In this Psalms 8 text, our writers want to begin to explain to us a particular psychological dynamic that we never seem to think about. The ways in which their particular entities in charge in our situations. If you have your Bibles, please grab your Bibles and turn to Psalm 8, or I'm going to share the scripture on the screen for your convenience. And we're going to check out Psalm 8. We're going to check out Psalm 8. We're going to check this text out from the New Revised Standard Version. Side note, did you know, as a family of faith, a part of the United Church of Christ, the translation that we primarily highlight is the New Revised Standard Version. So that's why I'm highlighting this particular version. Psalm 8, it is 9 simple verses, but these are powerful verses, if you will. Psalm 8 is a psalm about divine majesty and human dignity. Put a little thumbprint there, a little star right after that. That's that heading, divine majesty and human dignity. And let's check out these 9 powerful and prolific verses. Oh Lord, our sovereign, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory above the heavens. Out of the mouths of babes and infants, you have founded a bulwark because of your foes, to silence the enemy and the avenger. When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you have established, what are human beings that you are mindful of them? Mortals, that you care for them. Yet you have made them a little lower than God and crowned them with glory and honor. You have given them dominion over the works of your hands. You have put all things under their feet, all sheep and oxen, and also the beasts of the field, the birds of the air, and the fish of the sea, whatever passes along the paths of the seas. O Lord, our sovereign, how majestic is your name in all the earth. I'm going to keep the verses on the screen for a moment because there's a shift in this Psalm 8 passage that we want you to highlight and see for a second. We tend to believe verses 1 through 4 are all about God. However, there's a shift that occurs at verse 5. Verse 5 in this psalm is the turning point, if you will. Verses 5, 6, 7, and 8 are no longer talking about God, but in some sense talking about somebody else. Who is that other person, if you will? That other person or entity is us as human beings. There's 2 important points that this psalm highlights for us that our authors want us to pay close attention to. First and foremost, it's so important to highlight. Number 1, God is in control. As verses 1 through 4 highlight, the psalmist begins to explain why God is in control. God is in control because of God's ability, God's omnipresence, God's omnipotent power to create the whole entire world, create the entire universe. And so verses 1, 2, 3, and 4, as you see, highlight in some sense why we glorify and praise God. But the irony in this psalm is when we arrive at verse 5, there's a shift. Yet you have made them, mortal human beings, a little lower than God and crowned them with glory and honor. You have given them dominion over the works of your hands. You have put all things under their feet, all sheep and oxen, and all the beasts of the field, the birds of the air and the fish of the sea, whatever passes along the paths of the seas. Verses 5 through 8 are highlighting for us a simple point. There are some things that we are in control of. Surprise, just like Charles in charge, there are some particular aspects of life that we are in charge of. And so our writers in this particular text want us to learn in our Psalms for Black Lives book that even though God is in control and in charge of most items, there are some items that God has given us dominion and power and control over. We are in charge. And that's good news. Because we are in charge, that means we can, in some sense, embody social justice. Because we are in charge, that means we can live out the principles of fairness and equity and equality right here on earth. We, being inspired by Micah chapter 6, verses 6 through 8, can, in some sense, support justice by walking humbly, support graciousness and mercy to people, support a sense of compassion and love to folks. And our two writers of this particular book want us to reflect on how do we learn that we don't have to give our power away. How do we learn first and foremost that God has empowered us or given us power to do particular duties and responsibilities? Let me ask a question. In some sense, the biggest question that we have to wrestle with is, what are things in God's control that are outside of our control? And what are things within our control that God gives us empowerment to handle? So let's ask ourselves that question. I hope you have pen and paper handy. Jot down for a second, what do you believe are things that are in God's hands? And what do you believe are things that are in our hands? What are things that are in God's hands? And what are things that you believe are in your hands? I'll give you a couple of moments to jot down some particular ideas that jump out in your mind first and foremost. Before I ask you to talk about your list that you made, that means we have to first and foremost attack some particular myths. We have to attack some particular myths. There are some particular myths that say, everything is in God's hands. And I have no control over how to jump in and take things out of God's hands. That's a myth in Christianity. I know, growing up in church, we've been taught that. We even have gospel songs that have been created, symbolizing everything is for God to work out. In some sense, many social justice activists and theologians highlight this absolves us of our own human agency. We don't want to be absolved of human agency. We have to remember, in some sense, that our bodies are the walking bodies of Jesus, God, and the Holy Spirit as Christians. Our hands are not just hands that belong to us and our human identity. How do we begin to view our hands as the hands of Jesus that can be used to provide food to someone who is hungry? How do we see our feet as the feet of the Holy Spirit that we can use to walk into certain places and provide hope maybe to persons who are behind prison bars? How do we see our bodies as human agents of God's ultimate divine will. This becomes the answer or resolution that we must begin to integrate in our minds so that we don't absolve ourselves in some sense of our own sense of human agency. Because if that's the case, we can simply take our hands and wipe our hands away from doing anything that speaks to and meets the ills of a hurting people today. And so it's so important when we talk about liberation to remember, yes, verses 1-4 of this text highlight God is in control of some things, but it's also important for us to remember that God also empowers us to fix, to reconcile, to maneuver particular situations in other entities, environments, or phases. So let me pause for a second. What did you write on your list? Name for us, family, whether you're joining us on YouTube or Facebook, name for us. What are things that are in God's hands, in God's control? And what are particular things that are in your hands, in your control?
We don't have any responses right now.
Okay.
So, but I do, this is so helpful. It's helpful in that you talk about, agency. There's so much that we have responsibility for that, unfortunately, as you said, there's some songs, some interpretations that make folks think that God does everything. And when in reality, how do you grow if somebody does everything for you? How do you develop? You can't have somebody lift weights for you and get strong. It doesn't work that way. And this one of the things about this psalm is in that fifth verse, the NRSV translates it from the original Hebrew. Because in the NIV and the King James, New King James, it'll say that that we are made a little lower than angels, because many of the translators, they couldn't take that language. They thought that was just too lofty. That what the original Hebrew says, God made us a little lower than God. So that sets it into a whole different context, so they translated, from the original Hebrew. Kathleen, has joined us. Kathleen, we're looking at Psalm 8. And when you look at Psalm 8, the question is, what is in God's hands and what's in our hands? So you read Psalm 8, Dr. Buhuro pointed out the first 4 verses are about God, but 5, 6, 7, and 8 are about the dignity and worth of humans. There's some things in God's hand, some things in our hand. So if you can take a moment and jot down what you think is in our hands, what's in God's hand. Thank you, Doc. You continue.
Let me ask a question. Let us have some fun. While we're waiting for Kathleen and maybe others to arrive and respond.
Yep.
This particular gospel song, I put it all in his hands. No matter how great or small. He's the master of us all. I put it all in his hands. Would it be safe to say that God maybe sometimes says, nope, I'm going to put it back in your hands? Is it safe to say that maybe this particular gospel song is not quite 100% accurate? What if you were to ever place something in God's hands and God said, nope, I'm going to put that right back in your hands? What would you do? What would you say? Think about that for a second. We have a theology that we believe in that says, I put it all in his hands. I was originally Baptist before I joined the UCC. And I remember growing up listening to this amazing gospel song. I put it all in his hands. But I started to wonder, in light of what the Wilkes family is highlighting for us today, are there times when God throws it right back to us and says, nope, the ball is in your court. I'm going to put this in your hands for you to work out. Is that song inaccurate? What do we think? Is that song not true? Is there something that is a bit strange and perplexing about that song that it's not really theologically sound? What do we think?
Yeah. Kathleen says, oh my, I put it all in sand. They told me to let go and let God. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I love the song, but I also know that, on the other end, everything is not okay. Everything may be in God's hands, but there's some things our hands are supposed to help out with, and there's some things that we need to do. And so I can't just excuse my responsibility and say, I'm gonna put it in his hands for him to put this spoon in my mouth with some food. I can't put that in God's hand. I better put it in my hand so I can eat, so I can live. You put it all in his hands, huh? I can't put it in his hand for me to go to the bathroom, or else I'm gonna be laying in some mess. Hey, Reverend Emmett, glad you joined. What's in God's hands, what's in our hands?
That's it. That's it. And so we really have to take inventory of our life. Check out this image. In some sense, there are things that we cannot control. Check out everything you see on the outer circle. It would be the dark brown. Everything you see in the outside of the circle. Here are things I cannot control. So I can let go of these things, because these will be things that's only in God's control. I cannot control if others follow the rules of social distancing. In light of COVID-19, we are supposed to ask people to step back from us, or we're supposed to keep our masks on at all times. Well, we can control how we interact with persons in light of COVID-19, but we can't control how other people interact with their own lives in light of COVID-19. I cannot control the actions of others. I cannot control the actions of others. I cannot predict what will happen in the future. I cannot discern, figure out, predict other people's motives. I can't, in some sense, determine the amount of toilet paper at the store in light of COVID-19. But in light of COVID-19, there are some things I can't control that are within my control. Turning off the news and not continuing to be depressed when I watch the news and COVID-19 numbers continue to rise. Or I can't control my positive attitude in the midst of COVID-19. I can't control how I follow CDC recommendations. I can't control if I find fun things to do at home in light of a pandemic. I can't control how long I sit on social media watching people post various things about COVID-19. COVID-19 is an example of a time period that found us wrestling with, wow, what are things outside of our control that are only in the hands of God? And what are things that are in our control that we actually can maneuver within our hands? I'm going to place another image on the screen for you to think about it. Larger than the pandemic, we also recognize and realize if you look at all of the phrases on the outside of this person's head or face, this is what represents everything that's out of our control. So things that are out of our control are the past. You, me, we cannot control what happened in the past. I wish, I love the movie Back to the Future. I love the movie Back to the Future, right? In that movie, there's a gentleman who can use a traveling time machine to go back in the past and change the past. Or there was a popular television series in the 90s called Quantum Leap, with a gentleman who would jump into the past, change the past, and then therefore change the future. But that's television, that's movies. In hindsight, none of us can jump back into the past and change the past. If we could, there would be so much I would change, beginning with what happened in 1619 to 1864. I would, for real, change that first. If I could change anything in my life, I would change 1619 to 1619 to 1865. We also can't control the future. We can't control what happens tomorrow, next week, 5 years from now. These are out of our control. Only God is in control of what happens in the future. We can't control the actions of others. We can't control the opinions of others. We can't control what happens around us. We can't even control what other people think of us. We can't control the outcome of our efforts. That is powerful. I can try my best to accomplish a particular goal, but I can't control the outcome. Sometimes things will happen outside of my control. And finally, I can't control how others take care of themselves. In that gray circle, those would be what we would say is under God's control, or verses 1 through 4 in our Psalm 8 text. But verses 5 through 8 in our Psalm 8 text are everything you see on the face or head of this image in color. Things in your control are your thoughts and your actions, the goals you set, the boundaries you maintain, what you give your energy to, how you speak to yourself, and how you handle challenges. As you reflect on and think about your life, I hope you can connect the dots. I hope you can connect the dots to figure out, discern things that are in your hands, things that are in your control. I'll pause there for a moment. If anyone had anything.
Yeah, Kathleen said, okay, I know God gives us wisdom to make those decisions that are in our power, but I do wait for God's guidance on things out of my circle of control. And yeah.
Thank you so much for naming that, Kathleen. Yes. What I hear you speaking about is before you do anything that's within your control, you consult with God first. Yes, that is so very important. Thank you so much for naming that. We definitely want to highlight that. There's a famous biblical character. I'm going to pronounce his name wrong, so I'm going to ask our pastor to help me. There's a famous story in the Bible of a biblical character who wrestled with anxiety. He literally wrestled with anxiety, where if you looked at him, whenever he got nervous or scared, you would see his a tremble in his hands, a tremble, if you will, with his body. A particular phrase that we've unfortunately defined him as is jumping Jehoshaphat. Jumping Jehoshaphat. We call him jumping. Some people call him jumping because he wrestled with anxiety. But there is something, even in the midst of his anxiety, that he knew how to do well. One day, when he had an impending battle that he had to engage in as a military leader, he prayed to God. He prayed to God first and consulted God first and said, wow, what should I do? I've got to get ready to enter into military battle with this country that is fighting against Israel. And I'm scared. I'm jumping. I'm nervous. I'm anxious. But I do know that I should consult you first. Mm-hmm. And so thank you so much, Kathleen, because I thank you for in some sense lifting that up. Before we make any decision about the things within our control, how are we also consulting God first? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, you make such a good and I need those graphs. Oh yeah, because it helps really to put in a graph form clear what's in our control. Because I think we all know the most frustrating thing is to have somebody close to you that's not taking care of themselves, and you beat your head up against the wall or try to figure out what people are thinking, or even think that if I do this, that, and the other, then I'm going to secure my future, when we found so many times things didn't go that way. Reverend Emmett says, I wrestle with how patient I am in trusting God to do, I can't make out the last point, but dealing with patience and trusting God to do what God needs to do. And I guess that leads to that other point is, there's some things that only God can do that we want to do. Yeah, I know some folk that think they're God's personal helpers. They made the Trinity quadruple. I know people like that.
I know some people like that too. You're right. You're right. I definitely know some people like that too.
Yeah.
So another lesson that our writers want to highlight for us is, if it is in fact the case that certain things are in our control, that means that we need to take confidence. Take confidence. Take confidence. So in some sense, our writers are saying to us in our particular day 8 of the book, how do you have confidence? How do you have confidence? How do you encourage yourself when you're feeling like, okay, now I know that there are some things that I need to take control of, but maybe I'm feeling a little scared. Maybe, my favorite T word, maybe I don't know how to trust. And maybe because I don't know how to trust, I'm just scared, and I don't want to make a move at all. And so we begin to have to also, in this text, a second lesson to reflect on is, how do we learn to trust? How do we learn to trust ourselves? How do we learn to trust in our gifts? How do we learn to trust in all of the wonderful gifts that make us us? This becomes the lesson, the pivotal lesson for us during our time together, is figuring out and learning how to trust. In some sense, we have to, in order to learn how to trust in ourselves and our gifts and our abilities, we have to ignore our mind sometimes. We have to ignore our mind sometimes. What do I mean by that? I wasn't around when this song was out. This is for an older crowd, if you will. It was in the okay, I'm joking. I was around. It was in the late 80s, early 90s. A new hip hop rap group named the Ghetto Boys penned a popular rap song that was actually prolific for its time. It was actually showing or highlighting a psychological concept, right? It was prophetic in its time because it was actually highlighting a psychological concept that we didn't really pay much attention to. And the name of the song, I invite you to check it out and listen to the lyrics later, was "My Mind's Playing Tricks on Me."
My favorites.
My mind's playing tricks on me.
Yeah.
In some sense, our writers are highlighting for us this understanding that we got to learn in order to trust ourselves and handle those things that God is imparting to us and putting in our hands to control. We cannot allow our minds to play tricks on us and psych us out. We cannot allow our mind to tell us, you're not smart enough to fix that situation, or you're not smart enough to have the skill set to fix that situation. You don't even have the gifts and abilities. We can't believe those negative voices. We got to ignore those negative voices. And the psychological term for those negative voices in our minds is called cognitive distortions. Cognitive distortions. Cognitive distortions. Cognitive distortions. There are several types of cognitive distortions that exist. There's several types of cognitive distortions that exist. And these are things that happen to us mentally in our mind. And so that when they happen, we've got to push back against them and resist them. I'm going to make this image a bit larger so that we can go through each one of these. There are several types of cognitive distortions that exist. The first one is known as polarized thinking. Polarized thinking. Polarized thinking, for example, is like if a student gets an A- on an exam, they feel like they're a failure because they're used to getting only A+ grades. They have this mentality, well, if I'm not successful at everything I do, then I'm a complete failure. That's called polarized thinking, where you don't take into consideration your whole being. You only look at one event, one circumstance, one part of your being that maybe was not successful, didn't go well, was an unfortunate occurrence. And you now say the whole of your being is bad or not good. That's known as polarized thinking. And polarized thinking is what keeps us, in some sense, from achieving that which God wants us to be and do in life. Can you think of a biblical character who wrestled with polarized thinking? The first person that I think about is Moses in Exodus chapter 3. God sits our beloved brother Moses down to say, hey, I need you to lead these particular people from Egypt to the promised land and get them out of slavery and bondage. I need you to go to the person that has been enslaving them. His name is Pharaoh. He's a king. And I need you to tell him, you have to let my people go. First thing Moses says is, it's not going to work. It's not going to work, God, because I stutter. And because I stutter, you can't use me. I don't speak clearly. I don't speak eloquently. I have a stuttering problem. And God says, no, I can use you. Polarized thinking says, even if you get an A- on an exam, that's okay. You're still good. The second type of cognitive distortion that exists today is mental filtering. Mental filtering, where whenever you look at a particular situation, you immediately jump to the negative and disqualify all of the positive. You don't pay any attention to what's going well. You just only focus on everything that unfortunately may have went wrong. The next type of overgeneralization is, the next type of cognitive distortion is overgeneralization. That's where you make some assumptions about yourself that are not true. Because you may have made a mistake, now you say, I'm just a bad person. Because you had one simple accident, now you say, my life is not worth living. You begin to overgeneralize. You begin to overgeneralize particular instances in your life. Another type of cognitive distortion is jumping to conclusions. Jumping to conclusions. That's right. You begin to play psychic and say, well, if this happens, that means tomorrow or next week or next year, this is going to happen. Or because this happened, that means this fact must be true. And it's not true at all. You may say to yourself one day, because my spouse didn't bring me flowers on Friday, that means they don't love me. I'm not saying that that's any of you. I'm just throwing out a general example. Just because your spouse let Friday go past and they didn't bring you no flowers because they were busy working, they had a bunch of stuff that they had to do, that don't mean that they don't love you. You see? You see? Just throwing out a little example. Don't jump to conclusions that the spouse don't love you because they didn't bring no flowers on Friday. They met every other Friday in the last 3-4 years and just missed this one Friday. Okay, stay focused, Danielle. Okay, so that's an example of jumping to conclusions. We also don't want to move into a place and space where we are minimizing good. Minimizing good. That means there are wonderful attributes about you. There are wonderful, wonderful attributes about you. How do you not minimize those wonderful gifts that you have? Hey, God put you in control of certain things. That means you shouldn't minimize the wonderful gifts and the skills and attributes that you have. That also means please resist magnifying a crisis. Oftentimes when we get into a crisis, we make it bigger than what it actually is. Sometimes this crisis may actually be a small fragment, a pebble, but by the time we're finished analyzing it, we think it's a big boulder. And it's not as bad as we think it is, or it's not as huge where we can't overcome it, right? And so these are just a few types of cognitive distortions that in some sense rob us. These cognitive distortions rob us of our confidence. They rob us of our trust in ourselves. And so don't allow your mind to play tricks on you. Let me ask a question. You see this list on our screen. Let me ask a question, and I'll place another list on our screen. What kind of cognitive distortions have you been impacted by? What are examples of times in your own life when you've allowed your mind to play tricks on you? Would there be anybody who would like to give an example? If you would like to.
Yeah, nobody yet. I'm sure somebody's gonna punch in, but
Okay.
most of the ones on the list I participated in. I'm just gonna be honest.
Me too. Me too. Me too.
Yeah. And
Me too.
the fascinating thing is that children, unless they are impacted by parents or adults around them, they don't participate in those mind games. They can do anything. They'll try anything. They believe in themselves. They don't see any ugly child or anything like that. But it's only when we have adults put those fears and those things on us that we begin to question. I'm not able to do it because I'm not the one that gets picked all the time. I'm not smart enough. You know what? You didn't speak to me coming in, so that means you don't like me no more, and all this type of stuff. Mike Carson says I'm guilty of them. Uh, I'm guilty of them all also. So yeah. So
Yeah,
wow.
it's so I'll play some more on the screen, and it's it's so funny that you mentioned that, because in some sense that makes me begin to think about what are the ways in which life sometimes is about unbecoming.
Mm-hmm.
Michelle Obama wrote this book called Becoming a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I said she got it wrong. She got it wrong. She got it wrong. She got it wrong. She got a number of things wrong in terms of the content of the book, but just the idea of the title of the book being Becoming.
Mm-hmm.
I said, nah, maybe life is about unbecoming.
Yes.
I said, I'm going to write a book called Unbecoming. Because I believe that's exactly what you said, Pastor Jackson. So much of our life is really about letting go of all of these beliefs, perspectives, thoughts that have been unhealthy, that have been placed on us by maybe family of origin, friends, loved ones. And so how do we begin to let go of how do we begin to let go of these unhealthy beliefs that have been put on us, and go back to that mindset we had as a child, when we had no sense of fear about life.
Mm-hmm.
I had an opportunity one day. I had an opportunity to babysit. I had an opportunity to babysit a niece one day. I had an opportunity to babysit a niece one day. And then I had another opportunity to babysit one of my nephews one day. And I'll never forget it. Their home, where my brother and his wife lived, was a duplex where there's a first floor and a second floor. And connecting both floors were some stairs. And they decided to dress up as superheroes and see if they could fly down the stairs without walking down the stairs, but flying down the stairs. There was no sense of fear around, wow, if I just jump off of this top stair into the bottom stair, I'm going to hurt myself. Nope. They stood at the top of the stair in their superhero capes, and they dove off. They dove off the top stair all the way to the bottom stair. Watch this. They hurt themselves just a little bit. But then they jumped right back up and said, let's try it again. Maybe we need to work on our landing. And I watched them. They walked right back up the stairs and then did the exact same thing over again. They dove right off the top of the stairs. And this time they tried to plant their feet forward so that they would land on their feet. They didn't. They landed on their knees. They cried. They cried for a little while. But guess what they did? They got right back up, walked up those stairs, and did it again. And they did this over and over and over again until they said, we've had enough. And I began to think, maybe that's the way life should be, where we should go back to our childlike mentalities of saying, you know what, I'm gonna keep diving. I'm gonna keep diving. I'm gonna keep diving. I'm gonna practice how I land. If it didn't work this time, maybe I'll dive again and land a different way. But I'm gonna keep trying until I'm ready to say no more. Right? How do we begin to move back into our childlike mentalities and do away with our adult mentalities that say we shouldn't do that? That don't make no sense. That's dumb. That's stupid. On your screen are wonderful questions that I would invite our audience to jot down. How do we begin to trust in ourselves a bit more? How do we begin to have more confidence in ourselves and have more confidence in our gifts and our skills, that God has laid certain things within our hands to control and fix? We can learn to trust in ourselves more by challenging our cognitive distortions. These are questions that we can ask ourselves that challenge our cognitive distortions. And so when we feel like we're in the middle of making a cognitive distortion, we can pause and ask ourselves these questions and really reflect on these questions, because they'll begin to help us see, you know what, my mind is playing tricks on me. My mind is playing tricks on me. Now, pause. Pause there.
Yeah. Kathleen said, I have done most of these at one time or another. I try to avoid catastrophizing and blaming, but sometimes you just can't. Mike Carson says, whenever I mess up with my money, I feel knocked out of the game. And then Kathleen says, like Pastor Gil Rice said, don't quit.
Yes.
Don't quit.
Yes. Yes, 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 yes. Most definitely. Most definitely. Most definitely. Family. As we conclude our time together, I just want to encourage you to please resist cognitive distortions. And during the month of October, we have to highlight a big cognitive distortion that some people make. There's a cognitive distortion that some people make that says, I'm supposed to be in a relationship where someone physically abuses me. I'm supposed to be in a relationship where someone steals my money. I'm supposed to be in a relationship where someone harms my children. Right now, there is a woman someplace, somewhere, who believes that she is supposed to be in a marriage that entails her husband beating on her. Right now, someplace, somewhere, there is a gentleman that is in a marriage who has been led to believe that he's supposed to allow his wife to hit him. And he's not supposed to hit her back, because that's not what men do. Men shouldn't hit women. And as a result, now he's the victim of domestic violence. Right now, there is a child who is the victim of violence as a result of an immediate family member. We cannot believe these cognitive distortions about domestic violence. October is National Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Sometimes victims of domestic violence struggle with understanding there are things within their control. They feel like everything is outside of their control. And we just want to remind you that we have to be sensitive to our brothers and our sisters who find themselves as victims of domestic violence. If you or any member of your family, a friend, a loved one is currently, unfortunately, a victim of violence, we want to invite you. We want to invite you to please reach out to the National Domestic Violence Hotline, or this number, 1-800-799-SAFE or 7233. We want to ask We want to ask that you please, please, please break the silence. Please, please, please break the silence. Thank you. Thank you so much, family.
Thank you so much. And I'm just, I really, I thank God for you and I appreciate you because you balance it. You point out that men can be abused also. And that there are many men that are silent about it because one, you know, you never hit a woman. You know, she's got a you know, a knife or something and going at you. You ain't supposed to hit her, so they end up, you know, cut up, beat up. And then, you know, the other point is if a man admits that you're a victim of domestic violence, then there is that thing, you ain't a man. You know, you're saying something like that. So it's both. This is a violent nation that we live in, and children, men and women, are subjected to some very harmful behavior. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And family, just so you all know, Dr. Buhuro has a change in her schedule. So next week we'll start at 1 p.m. Instead of noon, we'll start at 1 p.m. So mark your calendars, we'll start at 1 p.m. I'll send out, you know, a reminder. But just so you know now, next week we'll start on Tuesday for the Dr. Buhuro's Bible class at 1 p.m. All right.
Thank you.
So much.